So, good day, everybody. You all registered for the webinar, How to Build Up Your Technical Documentation under the IVDR at DEKRA. Just a small introduction. I am Liz Gommans. I work as an IVDR technical file reviewer for DEKRA for several years now. And I will be giving this webinar. Just some small notes before we start. So first, you cannot open your microphone or your camera. However, you can post questions in the chat. Also, during the presentation itself, feel free to post your questions. So on the right part of your screen, you can see like this question mark with questions, and there you can just type your questions, and we will try to answer them as good as we can. Please note we cannot give any consultancy as we are a notified body. And at the end of the presentation, if we have some questions that come up frequently or are very important, we can also treat them live. So I'll be discussing them then. And so the purpose of the webinar is to see how you will build up your technical file under the IVDR, actually. So then we can start. So as I said, I was going to inform you a little bit on how to build up your technical file. It's also a bit, what do we expect at DEKRA from your technical file? So first, the content of this webinar. I will start to explain to you the TD review flow. So how do we review a technical file at DEKRA? Which steps are involved? Then I will start to describe which deliverables are expected per chapter or topic. So here on the right, you see the topics that we have. And this is also how our technical file report is built up. So we have general aspects, device description, risk management, GSPR and declaration of conformity, summary of scientific validity, analytical and clinical performance is a big chapter, usability, packaging, shelf life, performance evaluation, manufacturing information, labeling and biological safety. What I will not talk about today are the electrical safety, software and cybersecurity, and sterilization. These are such a big topics. I think we will take too long if we also cover these topics. So we'll focus on the top on these topics. And also I will describe which lessons we have learned, which can benefit you. This is just in the presentation, it comes every now and then in between, so yeah. So within DEKRA, we have this technical documentation checklist. As a manufacturer, I think you already received it. If not, please contact your project manager. It's also good to note that this checklist has been updated very recently. So just if you're now building up your technical dossier or in the process of finalizing it, please just check with your project manager that you have the latest version of the technical documentation checklist. So I think that's important to have. And also you will see in this technical documentation checklist these chapters that are listed here in this box here. You see they have the same structure. So also in this presentation you will see this structure back. And then it's important to mention here that the focus of this presentation is on the regulation and the CD documents and the ISO standards. This is not the complete list. So we have product-specific ISO standards. I will not talk about them because they are too specific. Also, CLSI documents can be very relevant for your device. I will not talk about those as well. So it will just be high level, but please, as a manufacturer, check which documents are relevant for you and make sure you have them all and the correct ones, etc. So the first tip is already provided here. So the most common reasons for delay for initial technical file reviews are incomplete submissions and lack of cohesive structure. So with incomplete submissions, we mean that we miss part of the documents. Yeah, that will just cause a delay. We have to ask, come back. We cannot do the full technical file review yet because we missed some documents. And also, yeah, the structure. We in the notified body see a lot of different technical file setups because every manufacturer has their own way of working, which is fine, but it's important that we can understand your way of working. I think that's the main message here. We need to understand how your file is built up and where we can find what, because if we cannot find things, you will get questions which will cause delay, and it's just not nice for anybody, I would say. So submit your documents in a clear and organized manner. And another very important point is documents in PDF or Word format should be searchable. So we should be able to search through these documents. That's also important. And as I said, I will discuss the TD flow at DEKRA. So what happens with your technical file when you submit it. So that's step one. The TD file is received within DEKRA, and what we start with is a quick scan. And in the quick scan, we just check if all the documents are there, if the content is on high level okay-ish, so not that there are just 3 sentences in a document, for example, but this is really on high level. So we do not do a real review yet at this point. This is just the quick scan. Is the submission complete? And if it's not complete, you will get a quick scan form stating which documents we are missing that we think we need, or which documents should be more complete, and then you can send all additional documentation to us. Then, once we have the complete technical file, we can start with our file review. So we will perform the file review, and that will then result in a list of questions. And this list of questions will then be sent to the manufacturer. And the list of questions can contain several forms of questions. So we have major nonconformities and minor nonconformities. Major and minor nonconformities are usually only when your device is already certified. If your device is not certified yet, so it's an initial review, then you will receive questions. So during the initial file review, these are the majority of the questions raised. Then we also have observations. So observations are small things like typos in an IFU or these kind of things. If we notice this as a technical file reviewer, we just write it down. They will not delay your certification, but it would be nice, of course, if you can change it. Yeah. Then the manufacturer has received this list of questions. Please be aware that as a manufacturer, you can always request for a meeting at DEKRA. So with the project manager and the technical file review, just to clarify certain questions. If you have unclarities or you do not know what the question exactly means, feel free to contact us. Do not hesitate. Also, it will improve the speed of the process also, because if we get replies to things that were not initially the question, then we'll just have to leave the question open and it will just take time. So feel free to contact your project manager to ask for a meeting to clarify questions. However, please be aware we are still a notified body, so we cannot do any consulting. So it will just be clarification. And then the manufacturer prepares the answers and sends them back to DEKRA. We will review the answers and close questions when they are okay, or if you have a major or minor nonconformity, we will review the CAPA. And then it's good to note that multiple rounds of answering questions are necessary usually. So do not expect that within one round all your questions are closed and you're good to go. That is not the common practice. We have at DEKRA now set a maximum of 3 review rounds, so 3 times answering the questions, and then we say all questions have to be closed. If we have some small administrative questions open, that is okay. But if we still have major things open, then it's not okay. Then, after all questions are closed, it will go through the internal review process within DEKRA. So a second reviewer will have a look at it, which we call a peer reviewer, and this might result in additional questions. So it's good to keep in mind that this can result. Sometimes it happens, sometimes not. It really depends. And then finally, so if the audit results and the TD review results are positive, then you can get your certificate, and we're all happy and good to go. So now I will go into the documents that we expect per chapter. So I will follow, as I said, the structure of the technical documentation checklist that we have, and this starts with the chapter of the general aspects. So here on the right, every time, you can see the relevant standards and guidances. So I'm not going to read them out loud every time. It's just for you to know you should keep these in mind, and yeah, that's actually the main message here. Yeah, and so what we expect in the chapter of the general aspects is, as it says, general information related to the device, name of manufacturer, basic UDI/VI, conformity assessment routes, classification with rational, applicable codes, authorized representative if applicable, and so on and so on. So this full list is in this in the technical documentation checklist. We also expect to receive the technical documentation checklist back. And then there is a column in this document where you can fill in where we can find all the information. So that actually helps us to trace back the information that we need in your technical file. Because as I said, every technical file from manufacturer looks different. That's okay, but we do need to find the information that we need to have. Then the second chapter is the device description. We basically follow here what is in the IVDR Annex 2, Section 1.1 and 1.2. So the product name, basic UDI again, intended purpose. Related to the intended purpose, please be consistent here. Think about your intended purpose very, very well and have it the same everywhere throughout your whole technical file. Because if the intended purpose is unclear, it's actually almost impossible for us to do a good technical file review, because we do not know what your exact claims are. So make sure that your intended purpose is good and consistent throughout the full technical file. This is one of the most important things. Also the intended user, so is training necessary, yes or no? Also, if the answer is no, it's nice if you can explicitly state that there is no training necessary, so we know that it's not. If you just leave it out, we might ask a question like, is it necessary or not, because we are not sure. The intended conditions of use, so where is it going to be used, the principle of the assay method, and so on and so on. Just a small note about the formal statements. These are signed documents that state if your device has derivatives of tissue, cell, or substances of animal, human, or microbial origin. So this correlates back to the GSPRs actually, but we need to have formal statements to state yes or no. Also, if your device has potential biological infectious material, and if your device has CMRs and or endocrine disrupting substances. So these three statements have to be provided, a yes or a no. Then we go to the risk management. So I think most of you have quite some experience with risk management, so that's nice. We also have a very clear risk management ISO standard, of course, that helps greatly. You provide us with your risk management plan. Please do not forget to include every point mentioned in section 4, from section 4.4 from the risk standard. Also, we need to know the composition of the risk management team, including their competences. So this is often forgotten. So the competences, what we expect to see here is that you inform us why this person is suitable to have to have an opinion about the risk management, basically. So their educational background, their working history, these kind of things we expect to see here in order to have a proper assessment to see if the risk management team is acceptable or not. And then risk analysis for the design, use, and the manufacturing process of the device, and risk evaluation. It's important to not forget to consider all product-specific risks. So we have these very nice guidance. It's also in the list here on the right. It's very nice if you use it, but that's not all. So you also have to consider your product-specific risks. Some products have very, very specific risks, and they have to be in your risk analysis. So be complete here. Really think it well through and write it all down. Then we continue to the general safety of GSPRs and the declaration of conformity. So yeah, what do we expect here? For the GSPRs, we expect a list of applicable standards and common specifications, including the actual version used, so including the years, and then also the GSPR checklist. So here we have an example of a GSPR checklist. So you note the GSPRs, you say if it's applicable or not, how you have demonstrated the conformity, the evidence of the conformity, and where we can find this back in the technical file. So this is an example of how this general GSPR checklist would look like. And it's very important to mention here that if something is not applicable, please provide a rationale. Even though sometimes it's very obvious that it's not applicable, we as technical file reviewers, we are not allowed to make any assumptions. So you have to tell us basically. And yeah, if you just say not applicable and we think, yeah, we completely agree, but we cannot make any assumptions. So we still might have to ask why it's not applicable. And these are questions, they're not necessary. And yeah, if they can be prevented, that is, I think, nice for everybody. Then the declaration of conformity. I think what should be on there is very clearly described in Annex 4 of the IVDR. Just one note, in case of sampling, an EU declaration of conformity is expected for each device within your subcategory or generic device group. So please note that for every device that falls under your group you want to have that you want to have certified within your sampling, we need to receive the declaration of conformity. Then we go to the summary of scientific validity, analytical and clinical performance. So this is actually the biggest chapter in the technical file report. Why? Because it's basically all the clinical evidence that you have to provide within one chapter. As you will probably know, the performance evaluation consists of three important parts. So you have the scientific validity, that is the association between the analyte and clinical condition or physiological state. That's the scientific validity report. You have the analytical performance, that's the ability of an IVD to correctly detect or measure a specific analyte. The analytical performance report we expect as a deliverable here. And the clinical performance, the ability of a device to yield results correlated with particular clinical condition, physiological process, or state in accordance with the target population and the intended user. So here we expect as a deliverable the clinical performance report. So these three things together build up your clinical evidence, basically. So just to start from the beginning, scientific validity. So scientific validity is the association of an analyte with a clinical condition or physiological state. Related to this, the MDCG 2022-2 has some very nice tips on how to handle the scientific validity. What we expect is a systematic scientific literature review to support your scientific validity. So it should be systematic. That's important to note. The search strategy must be described very clearly and also justified. Why is this an okay strategy or why not? These kind of things. And we also expect to receive the referenced selected literature in full text copies. So this is very often forgotten. So within your technical file, we expect to see the full text copies of the literature which you have determined to be relevant for your device. And everything together, of course, will be in your scientific validity report. Just something to note, that a scientific validity can have different components. So if you have more than one clinical function claim, so for example you have screening and diagnosis, or these kind of things is in your intended purpose, you have to demonstrate the association for all of them. So I just have here an example just to try to clarify what I mean. So the intended purpose here is the device ABC is a manual quantitative lateral flow immunoassay for aid in diagnosing, that's one, and monitoring of gallbladder cancer patients in conjunction with standard diagnostic procedures. Okay. The device can also be used for early detection, that's 3, of patients with symptoms of gallbladder cancer. It measures soluble fragments of analyte X in urine. Device is for professional use only. So what do you need to demonstrate here is that the marker, analyte X, in this case, is suitable for the diagnosis, monitoring, and early detection of patients with gallbladder cancer. So you have to really demonstrate all 3 aspects. So that's important to keep in mind for your scientific validity. You really have to break down your intended purpose and check what claims do I really make. Then we continue with the analytical performance. So I cannot go into detail in relation to the analytical performance. I think I would need another hour in order to do that. But here, so what is stated in the IVDR is that the manufacturer shall demonstrate the analytical performance of the device according to all the parameters described in yada yada yada. So basically, I listed here in the table, in the green table, all analytical performance parameters that are listed in the IVDR. So you have specimen type, so we say handling, stability, storage conditions, accuracy of the measurement, which is composed of the trueness and the precision, analytical sensitivity, analytical specificity, metrological traceability, measuring range, linearity, assay cutoff, carryover and cross-contamination, instrument comparison, and other relevant topics if applicable. And so some devices have some very specific analytical parameters you have to check, but that's really device specific then usually. So this list, as written down here, might be that not all is relevant for your device. So if specific analytical performance parameters are not relevant, then it's okay, but provide a justification. Why is it not relevant? Do not just leave it out, because then you'll get the question, you have to still state why it's not relevant. So just write down why they are not relevant for your device. What we expect per analytical performance parameter is actually the test plan and the test report. So we need to see what you have done, how have you tested what was your experimental setup in order to determine, for example, the analytical sensitivity and also the report. So in the report we need to see sufficient detail to allow us to make a proper judgment if the experiment, if the test has been properly done, and if it's if the results are acceptable or not, potential outliers, all these kind of things we expect to see back in the test report. So everything together is summarized in the analytical performance report. And I think it's good to note as a manufacturer that usually how we work within a notified body, we start with the analytical performance report, and then we go back to the test plans of the specific analytical parameters. So ideally, you have a reference in your analytical performance report to the specific plan and report of that analytical parameter, so we can easily trace back where we can find everything and all the details that we need to see. So yeah, that's would be very much appreciated. Then some lessons we have learned here. So all in MDCG 2022-2, it's also literally stated that all different specimen types and specimen handling conditions that are indicated in the intended purpose should be assessed and demonstrated. So that means that if you have, if you're claiming more to be able to use more than one specimen, you either have to demonstrate all the analytical performance parameters per specimen type, or you have to provide a clear justification why it's okay to have only that one specimen type and why they would work the same, these kind of things. But that should be a very solid justification then. It's also good to keep in mind that if previous device generations have been used, a rationale and evidence for the equivalence to the current device has to be demonstrated by data. So probably a lot of you have IVDD legacy devices. They have already been marketed under the IVDD. They now go to the IVDR. So then a lot of your analytical performance parameters have been investigated while it was under the IVDD. Then you have like a while goes by, you might make some changes to your device, and now we're here and you go for IVDR certification. So if you have made changes to the device, please write this down clearly in your technical file report, technical dossier, and state when these changes have been made, and also assess if this might affect the data that you have provided for your analytical performance parameters. So it might be that you change something via which the analytical performance parameter you have measured like a while ago is no longer valid. So it's good to think about that up front, otherwise you will get questions, and at that stage it's not so nice to get these kind of questions. Yeah, so it's good to also have a clear list and to think for yourself very closely, why is this okay or not, potentially, and is there a gap? Also verify that you've used the correct standards. State of the art is state of the art today. So not when the device was being developed, it's state of the art today. And verify the acceptability of your acceptance criteria. So why are the acceptance criteria you have set okay or not? And also remember, FDA compliance, it's not the same as IVDR compliance. A different legislation, different things. Also provide rationales and other information if you have things written down, for example, in your test plan, which do not match your test report. Just be clear what the difference is. Do not leave values out or change aspects in comparison with the plan without a justification. We all know things happen, that's okay, but just have a justification why it's still acceptable and be clear on it. And the clinical performance. So what's written in the IVDR is demonstrate the clinical performance of the device in relation to all parameters described in point 9.1b of Annex 1, unless any omission can be justified as not applicable. So what do we expect here? We expect a clinical performance study plan, which is clearly written down actually in the IVDR, what is expected there. The clinical performance study report is also quite clearly described in the IVDR with these aspects as listed here below. And justification when the performance evaluation is not deemed appropriate. So if you think you do not require to do a clinical performance study, state why. A clear justification. And this will all result, of course, in a clinical performance report. Just some lessons learned in relation to the clinical performance. Do not forget to provide a rationale for the number of samples you have used. I think even though there are a huge amount of samples, you still need to have a rationale why this is okay or not. A rationale for the acceptance criteria, that's also important. It should be based on state of the art, so literature, standards, guidelines, these kind of things. But you need to have a rationale why is this acceptance criteria okay. Yeah, as I said also before, state of the art is now, not back then. And a statistic analysis, including a clear description of outliers. So outliers, they happen, but you need to have a clear description of why it's an outlier, preferably with statistical analysis, etc. And then one important thing to mention here is if you have a clinical study performed under the IVDD and you now go to the IVDR. I think it's important to note that there are differences between the IVDD and IVDR. So if your clinical study has been performed under the IVDD, your data can at least still be relevant and suitable, but you need to assess. You need to make an assessment of the quality and the completeness of the data. So make a gap analysis, what is required by the IVDR, what do we have, and potentially you might have to fill in some gaps. It's best to do that before you send it to us as a notified body, because otherwise we will come back with a question and will take you probably some time to solve these kind of things, and yeah, it's just not preferred. And also take into consideration in your assessment if you've made changes to the device. So the same as I said before for the analytical parameters, it actually holds here. So if you've made changes to your device after the clinical study has been performed, please check if these changes do not affect your clinical study and why your clinical study is still relevant or not. Then we continue to usability. So what do we expect here? We have a very nice ISO standard for usability, so that helps. We expect actually just the usability engineering file, including use specifications, identification of the user interface characteristics, identification of known and foreseeable hazards. Yeah, and I can continue to read everything, but I think it's best just to check the ISO standard, what is expected here. If you have a legacy device, you can also consider to use the UOP, user interface of unknown provenance, which is Annex C of the ISO standards. Good to at least to know that it's there, could be useful or not, depends on your situation. Then specifically for self-testing and near-patient testing, you have to take into account the skills and environment of the user. So make sure you have the right user population during your studies, because otherwise, yeah, there is no, yeah, you have to redo it, and that's not nice. And especially for self-testing devices, yeah, the information and instructions should be easy to understand and to apply. That's also very important. And just as a reminder, usability is also applicable for devices for professional use only. So usability is not only for near-patient or self-testing devices, it's for every single device applicable. So I just give you a minute to read it. The main message of the cartoon is, don't make it too difficult. Okay, then we continue to packaging. So what do we expect for packaging? We expect a description of the full packaging system, including sizes, so just the complete picture. Clear drawings of the packaging system also, so how is it being transported, what does it look like? We have not seen the device in real life. So we need to see some pictures in order to get some idea of how it's being done. Also specifications of the packaging material we need to have. And what is often forgotten and very important is a detailed description of the current transport conditions. So what often happens is we get this very nice test report, we get a plan, we get a report. It all looks very nice, but we have no idea how the device is really being transported in real life. So yeah, it's important for us to know how this is being done, because otherwise we cannot make a proper judgment on if it's acceptable or not. And also, yeah, the transport testing, of course, on the packaging and devices, which tests have been performed, yeah, and why is your packaging setup suitable for the device. So we expect packaging validation for compatibility with labeling. The particulars on the label should be indelible. Physical, chemical and microbial protection, leakage of toxic substances, of course, and protection during transport and storage. So that's actually what we need to see. And this is just also written in the IVDR. Then we continue to the shelf life chapter. We also have a nice ISO standard for that one. What do we expect? We want to, of course, see which claims do you make related to shelf life and in-use stability. It's important. The storage conditions of the device. And then we need to see the data to back up the shelf life and the in-use stability. There are, of course, two ways, as you probably all know. So you have the accelerated aging study and the real-time aging study. Please note that we have a very, very, very high preference for a real-time aging study, because yeah, that's the real data, of course, and that's yeah what we want to see in the end, anyways. So if you use your accelerated aging study, be sure that you clearly describe where your parameters come from. So if you, for example, use the Arrhenius equation, please be clear on which parameters have you used and why as input for this equation. Be complete here. Also, if you use accelerated aging study protocol, we expect that you already started meanwhile the real-time aging study protocol, and we also want to see the plan for the real-time aging study. So that's important. You have to submit that directly with the accelerated aging study. If you have real-time data, we're happy. We want to see the plan and the report, of course. And it's also good to mention here, we need to see some evidence of temperature logs or other means for how you can demonstrate that the temperature you have placed your device in was also really that temperature. So if I have, for example, an incubator, we would like to see the temperature logs of that incubator, these kind of things. They are often forgotten, so keep that in mind. Then we have the in-use stability study protocol and report. So for in-use, actually the same story as for the full shelf life study. Then we have, of course, the transport study protocol and report. It can also be with the packaging transport studies together, so that's up to you how you have done it. Yeah, but we also need to see that the device is kept at a specific temperature or during the transportation. Verification needs to be checked for the performance of the device. So is the device still performing at the end of the shelf life? But also for the labeling. Is the label still readable at the end of the shelf life? This is often forgotten, so please keep that in mind. We also need to see this. And then we go to the next chapter, which is performance evaluation and post-market data. What we expect to see here is the performance evaluation plan. It's clearly described in the IVDR actually, and it needs to have a strong connection to the state of the art. So here we really want to see the state of the art back. The performance evaluation report, which should include, of course, the individual reports like the scientific validity, analytical performance, and clinical performance. Then for the post-market part, during the technical file review, we look at the post-market performance follow-up plan, which is described in Annex 13, and if applicable, the post-market performance follow-up report, only if applicable. The PSUR, it's good to mention here that the PSUR is only only for class C and D devices, but also after the device has been certified. So we would like to see the PSUR like either for class D devices 1 year after the device has been certified, or for class C devices, we want to see it when we do a surveillance review, for example. So the device group, probably you've done sampling, so the device group is on the market already for over 1 year. Then with the submission of the surveillance technical dossier, we do expect to see a PSUR there, but not necessarily at the initial file review, because you do not need to have a PSUR yet. So before certification. As I said, PSUR is voluntary until you have your IVDR certificate, of course. And it's good to mention, if you do not have a PSUR, you need to, of course, have a PMS report. That's good to mention here. So it's not that you don't have to do anything. Manufacturing information, what we expect here, we expect to see a list of the critical suppliers and subcontractors for the specific device under review, of course. You need to specify for which activities they are used, and we need to see copies of their QMS, product certificates, these kind of things, depending on what is relevant and what you're using the supplier or subcontractor for. But yeah, we do need to see like a very clear and structured list of what you are using, who you're using, and yeah, the evidence that they are performing as expected. Then an overview of the production process and flowchart is expected. So we expect to see here the process steps, the quality inspections, final tests, and references to procedures. So this is about during the production process, but we also need to indicate if you have any special processes. And with special processes, we mean processes that are not fully verified. They cannot be because it's a destructive test, these kind of things. And for those, we want to receive the IQ, OQ, and PQ for those special production processes. And then, very important, we would like to see the final testing activities and release criteria. So before your batch is released, what do you do? How do you verify it? This is often forgotten actually, but we really expect to have this information in the technical file. Then we go to labeling. What we expect here is basically all labeling. Just like what's on the package, on the device, the IFU, all these details, location of the labels, where is it placed on the packaging or the device, all IFUs, installation and service manuals, if this is applicable, also marketing procedures and website address. We also expect to see that back in the technical file. And if you have a class C or D device, the SSP. There is the guidance, it's listed on the right here, NDCG 2022-9, which is the SSP template. We also expect to see that one. Then the final chapter, we're almost there, about biological safety. What do we expect here? So it's only applicable if you have a device which has a biological infectious agent, so GSPR 11 or 12, or CMR, or endocrine disrupting substances present, GSPR 10. So if one of these is applicable, we need to have biological safety. We need to have evidence that the safety regarding to the biological transmittable agents is addressed. So this is for GSPR 11 and 12. that the risk of infection and or contamination is reduced as far as possible. Very important, the description of the biological safety tests that are performed. So which tests have you performed and why is this okay to do these tests? Yeah. Then if you have GSPR 10 being applicable, so the carcinogenic, mutagenic and or toxic to reproduction substances or substances with the endocrine disrupting properties in a concentration higher than 0.1% weight, then we also expect you address the GSPR 10. There is a specific regulation mentioned in this GSPR, and we expect you to address this regulation. So just some final remarks. So it's good to keep in mind we all have the same goal. We want to bring the products onto the European market. However, they have to be safe. That's of course important. We have to raise during our technical file reviews a lot of questions for confirmation. So sometimes you will see a question in your list of questions you think like, this is so obvious. Why are they asking this? As I said before, we cannot make any assumptions, so we have to ask it. You have to tell us, even though sometimes it's very obvious. However, the good news is these questions are very easy to close usually. So keep in mind that it's always possible to have a meeting with a project manager and a technical file reviewer after receiving the list of questions. As a manufacturer, it's important to think before you start with your technical files, how you will arrange the devices in your technical files. And this is especially for IVD devices. They often have, for example, controls. Will you place them in the same technical file or will you place them in a different technical file? These are things that's important to think about this before you start to arrange your technical files, because it might change your technical file structure. Also, just as a note, you can find some additional information. There is a Team MB best practice guide. It's listed here. If you just copy the title and put it in Google, you will find the document. Also good to note, we accept all devices that are under our designation, so we do not make exceptions for Class D devices or these kind of things. We accept everything that is under our designation, of course. That's of course important. And then finally, please do not postpone your submission. We all know that there is some news about transitional provisions and these kind of things, but still it's important to keep on submitting your technical file. If you are at the end of the timeline, you will probably end up being too late. So please do not postpone this, very important. So, finally, are there any questions? I expect a lot of questions to be written in the chat meanwhile, but I can also still take some questions now if you want to. So, I think it's also maybe good just to treat some of the questions that are meanwhile posted in the chat. So we had one question about expected review timelines. Well, it's good to mention here that at DEKRA, at the moment for IVD, we have capacity to review technical files. So at the moment, it's no problem at all for us. We do have to, of course, mention here that it might change in the future. So that's also why I mentioned, please do not wait until the end, because then we might have capacity problems again. So submit in time, and then there is no real issue related to capacity actually. And we aim to send, so after the start of the file review, we say we need 12 to 16 weeks for the first list of questions. And then, it depends a little also on the quality of the file. So sometimes it takes longer, sometimes shorter, but I think, up until now, I think 1 year is definitely not uncommon for the full, from starting point until certification, that time period then. So it's good to start in time and keep in mind to start submitting now. Then there was one question related to the scientific validity. So the question was, how can we make a scientific validity if there is no link to a specific clinical condition for our analyte? If you have these generic analytes, and I do see the challenge here for the manufacturers. If you have, for example, sodium, well, it's connected to so many different physiological diseases, basically. Yeah, it's hard to make a real connection every single time. But what we do expect to see is that you make the connection, for example, for sodium to a physiological state. You do not necessarily have to list every single disease that is associated with sodium. So just make it then more general if it's an analyte for a generic a disease, or, well, physiological state. It's a better description than disease. And then we had a question about shelf life. Just give me one. Oh, would shelf life tests be expected to be after transport simulation? So yeah, we do expect shelf life in combination with transport simulation. Same holds for the in-use stability study. So we expect that the in-use is also connected to your full shelf life, because in the end you can use it all together. I mean, your timeline will not be separated in reality as well. So that's what we also expect here. And then maybe the last question to reply here to is if we see controls more often included in the technical file of the connected device or separate. It really depends on the manufacturer's preference, and I would also suggest you as a manufacturer to think about this upfront before you are making your full technical file structure. The same holds, for example, for multi-analyte devices. So if you have analyte A in more than one device, you can consider to put all these devices into one technical file. It depends on the classification of the device, if it will be subjected to sampling or not. It depends on what your device itself looks like. If it's really this specific analyte, if it's really the same in device A, the measurement method, as in device B, for example. So I would suggest if you have these type of devices, so with controls or with multiple analytes that are in different devices, to also discuss this with your project manager, what could be a good approach to build up your technical files in relation to this, because it can be complex. There is no right or wrong here. It's just also what you as a manufacturer prefer, what could be more efficient or not, and this really depends on the devices that you have, actually. So it's good to think about it, and if needed, have a discussion with your project manager related to this. Somebody tells me there's one more question. Regarding the scientific validity of a physiological state, if you don't want to make a claim about a disease, but still give an example of a disease as you suggest, would that not be confusing? So it's not necessarily an example of a disease then. It would more be an example of a state. I think that should be the difference. So if we take sodium, for example, you should demonstrate that sodium in general is associated with multiple affected physiological states. But you do not necessarily have to go into every single disease that is associated with sodium, as an example. It's an easy example. But you do have to demonstrate something. So it can be like a general review. What's the name? So like just a general review from an academic group or something like that. But there has to be some link. So I think that's the main, but what I want to say is you do not necessarily have to go through every single disease on its own. That would be an overkill, but it really depends on the analyte. If you have a novel analyte, of course, then it's different again. So that's also good to keep in mind, because then you do, of course, have to go through every single disease. So there's also some difference there. It really depends on the device. And then I see one more. If a device has 10 different components, as a kit. Also manufacturer interest to sell as individual components as well, then device need to be considered as 10 different devices. It's a difficult question because so if you would look into the IVDR, strictly speaking, you would get all different basic UDIs for every component because you can sell them separately. So in that sense, yes, you can say you have 10 devices. However, we will just look at the full technical file. Probably also cannot review them separately because they are in one kit. So we just look at the kit and that will be certified. And then with that, all the 10 components will be certified as well. So that's more how you should see a situation like this. I hope that is okay, the answer. It's clear enough. I don't know if there are any other questions. Okay, if not, I would like to thank you for your time. And please note that if you have more questions or later on questions come up, feel free to ask them. You can contact DEKRA at the email address on the website, but also you can directly contact your project manager, of course, with any questions that you have. So I thank you for your time and have a nice day, evening, wherever you are. Thank you.